Welcome to Speaking of Service, the podcast that uncovers practical ways to grow service revenue, control costs, and improve customer satisfaction. If you're looking to innovate, gain a competitive edge, or just learn about the latest service trends, you've come to the right place. Today, Anthony Malfa has the pleasure of speaking with Harald Fiedler, Director of Integrated Product Quality and Cybersecurity at FujiFilm Sonosite, to tell us about their journey and how they raise the security bar.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us again on Speaking of Service. My name is Anthony Malfa, and this is the third in a series of IoT security-based discussions that we're having. The first was with Tyler Gannon and from Device Authority. We were talking about zero trust and security trends that we're seeing in the IoT space. Then we had James Penny, who was also from Device Authority. And we were discussing the role that AI is starting to play in IoT security. And now today, we wanted to take more of a practical look at this. We're going to bring Harald Fiedler in from FujiFilm Sonosite and talk about what they're doing in their world and how they're deploying security and the way they've envisaged security. And to kind of backline this a little bit, probably the number one question that we get as an IoT platform vendor is security related at the edge and security of obviously the servers. And customers ask us, well, we have a lot of equipment in the field, so how do we actually implement an acceptable security model in our world? Basically backfitting that in. And that is something that we do offer an option to people. We can help you get things connected. But when you get into the idea of a digital thread and you start to look forward to things, you say, well, what about designing for the future? What about getting into newer versions of security or making sure that my devices are secure from the start? Because most of the devices that we talk about today are what we call brownfield. They've been designed 10 or 20 years ago, so they may not have been designed to really connect to the internet. Now, this is the advantage that we have working with a customer like FujiFilm Sonosite. They're taking on a brand new piece of equipment, and that piece of equipment has been designed to be connected. It's designed with the intent to be remotely monitored. And that's why we have Harald joining us today. Harald, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time here.
No problem, my pleasure.
You really took a brand new look at security and said, our product, we want to do secure connectivity. We want to leverage a product like ThingWorx to talk to our devices. But that was the number one question you had to answer for your customers, correct? Security?
Security, privacy, yes. And for our customers, so for our external customers and internal customers, how do we leverage the data we have in our systems in a meaningful way?
And you know, having talked with different customers over the years, even though it's one of the first questions they ask, it's typically not one of the first things that they design into your product. So this tells me that this isn't your first IoT program that you've worked on. Is that true?
That is affirmative, yes. I used to work for one of the largest medical device manufacturers based out of the Netherlands, where we built the entire infrastructure, connected infrastructure for all modalities, yes. But the funny thing is when you mentioned it, it's not security is not on the forefront, the frontal lobe of our customers. It is absolutely correct when it depends on which customer type you're talking about, right? So if you talk to the clinicians, of course, security and privacy is probably not the first thought. But IT administration and IT security, that is the first thing to ask about.
So when you started down this path, what concerns did you have? I mean, for example, you're in a heavily regulated environment. So security is one issue that you're concerned about, right? But you're also in a medical device manufacturer's world where the FDA and EU MDR and other items apply, HIPAA, and a whole host of different regulatory concerns. So how did this kind of factor into your discussions about security?
So we all heard about WannaCry, Configure, and exploits that have impacted worldwide computer systems. And while hacking is fun for if you hacked a high school principal's computer and maybe did a quilting society's website, but it takes on a complete different meaning when you talk about healthcare. In healthcare, we use computer systems to triage patients, diagnose and treat patients. If attackers render a healthcare system unusable, or worse yet, modify the data on the healthcare system that generate misleading results, it can lead to serious injury and death. So whenever you evaluate these potential concerns, security becomes really, really important for any organization. And when we talk about what are the concerns, the biggest concerns of you have the customer side, you have the impact on the patient. The next thing you need to think about is the protection of the asset needs to be, the level of protection needs to be commensurate with the asset's need for protection. So it's different if you have a nuclear missile silo, right? You have very different security measures than what you have on your Amazon account. That's the first part. You need to identify what's the asset you want to protect. So you need to understand your data. You need to understand the computer systems you're dealing with. But you also need to understand your own organization's limitations and limitation in terms of being able to adapt to changes. Introducing security and privacy controls definitely is a change to the organization, especially a significant change if the organization has not yet instituted any of those policies. So in some cases, you will have to select technical controls as well as policies that need to be implemented in the organization. And you might have to do a phased implementation. These are the biggest challenges, I think, when we talk about trying to bring an organization up to snuff in security and privacy.
So it's almost a think big and act small proposal. Think big how you want to get to the end result, but you may have to implement smaller phases as you go through that process.
Exactly. So there are a number of factors that play a role here. So when you think about security and privacy, you have basically 3 items to deal with: the customer, the location of the customer, the data, and your own organization's policies, and of course the regulatory landscape in the world. So cybersecurity and privacy, they should be really linked together. They're tied to the hip, right? You cannot have one without the other. I cannot have privacy if I have no technical controls and policies. You also have to worry about the regulatory landscape. In the United States, we don't have a statutory right to privacy, which is absolutely opposite in the EU. In the EU, every EU citizen has the right to privacy. In the US, we have sectorial laws that allow or make it legal to share information, personal information between companies. It's not really for the protection of your patients or the people. It's more it's to make it legal to share this information.
But you're talking about information outside of PHI, outside of protected health information. You're just talking about generic information about an individual.
So both.
Okay.
Generic information as well as HIPAA.
Okay.
So whenever you sign your HIPAA consent when you go to your doctor in the United States, if you actually read the fine print, it's about them being allowed to share the information with the providers and the insurance companies, right? So they actually share this information. More often than not, corporate interest, the interest of 3-letter agencies or political groups is often the trump, no pun intended, the privacy rights of American citizens. Why is this realization important? Because depending on who your customer is, you might be obligated to host the data in the United States. So if your customer is the VA, the DoD, or the Department of Health and Human Services, they have those little clauses that say, oh, by the way, the data must be hosted on US soil. And this is primarily for governmental access purposes. Whereas in the EU, it's very different. In the EU, we actually have GDPR, that protects the export of, or the grand export of personal information to other countries, including the US, because they're not deemed secure in the GDPR sense. Does that make sense? So now that we understand the hosting location, the customer, and the type of data really does matter. So if you have PHI, yes, you do fall under GDPR EU in the EU and HIPAA in the US. So yes, there's big. The data matters, the location matters, the customer matters.
And we are even seeing that in other markets, not even related to a HIPAA requirement or even a privacy requirement, but there are data sovereignty, basically, I don't want to say rules, but regulations that have gone into effect, for example, in China, where China has to stay within China, right, in order to do business there. And there's some other things. So that's becoming an expanding piece of this, co-related, I guess, to security, but another topic all on its own. So I want to circle back, though, to what we've done on this project with you. And, you started off, you had an idea what you were going to do, you had some expectations. Would you say that you've met those expectations? Did you achieve them? Yes,
I would say absolutely yes. To cut to the chase, yes, we have met the expectations, but I actually thought it was a lot easier. So my initial thought was we have all the relevant security and privacy controls implemented at the initial release of our new product. And I have to admit, this was a little bit of wishful thinking on my part. As creating policies and reorganizing certain parts of the organization doesn't come, it takes time. It doesn't come for free. And ultimately, I have to say, I was very pleased with the results. We addressed the most important controls first, and then we built the associated policies and processes within the organization. For instance, we had to create an incident management process, and we had to establish a CSIRT team, so an incident response team to strengthen. We decided to strengthen the system's defenses with every patch release. Ultimately, we have achieved our primary goal on the second patch release of this new product.
You bring up a very important kind of overarching discussion about implementing any kind of change in an organization. And you chose a technology, which is good. You had a business case that helped you do that. But that's not the end of the process. There's other things that have to happen, meaning you have to implement that new technology into your day-to-day operations. And the bigger one that you brought up was you really need to have an acceptance within your organization. You want to make sure that there's an adoption of that technology within the organization. And the last piece of that typically is we need a rollout process. We need a process that rolls this out and reduces the risk within the organization. Because just buying technology doesn't solve a problem. It's a tool. It's not the solution itself.
No, I completely agree. I think from the implementation itself, so whenever you walk down the path of integrating IoT and IT services in your organization, the first question the organization has to ask themselves is this part of our core business? And it's a really, really important question. If you want to compete with the PTCs of the world and the device authorities of the world, who have done this for many, many years, then be my guest. Yes, you can build your own IoT infrastructure, your own data centers, and your own cloud services. Sure, but you are going to be staffed for this. Just as a warning to your listeners, do not ask your engineers whether they can build you that. The answer, of course, we engineers can build this for you. The question you have to ask is, can you afford this, that your engineers spent the next 10 years on developing something that you could buy today from an IoT company, such as PTC and Device Authority, right? So at FujiFilm Sonosite, we first thought, of course, we can build it ourselves. And we quickly realized that this was not such a good idea. So we partnered with PTC and Device Authority. And in my humble opinion, it was the right decision. It was We made really great progress. I think the biggest hurdle for us was to align our own organization internally.
To kind of put this in context for the people that are listening in here, overall, this was done well under 6 months, right? From the time that
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yes.
This is what we're going to do. We went through figuring out exactly how you wanted to implement it, what your scope was, and then built it, tested it, and deployed it. So it was if you're trying to build your own program in under that amount of time, that's a pretty amazing feat.
Having done this a couple times in my life, I don't think it's possible without the help of people like PTC and Device Authority. You will not be able to stand up an entire infrastructure like this in 6 months. And
we are maintaining the IoT space, Device Authority is maintaining the security space. So again, it's all part of that process. Are there any early results that you're starting to get back with your program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had, as you said, within 6 months, we were able to set the pilot up. And by the way, we have done this in three separate environments. In production, we brought up a production environment, test, and a QA environment. We have built all the services out. We have tested it. We are in the final stages of acceptance testing. So I think in 6 months, we have achieved quite a lot in those 6 months. And the team was working really well together. There were challenges, of course. You always have challenges, especially when you have two different engineering teams. You have a cloud team and you have an embedded software team. They speak different languages, so to speak. And I think the adjustment and the standardization of nomenclature was probably one of the biggest hurdles. So we understand what we're talking about when we talk to each other. And I think the second challenge was a little bit the project management side of things, where you had to deal with PTC, with Device Authority, and with Transition Technologies, who is a configurator for PTC. I think, but this is just a standard project management challenge, I believe.
But even then, with three different engineering teams working together, this actually went pretty smooth as far as implementation programs of this size.
Absolutely, yes. Yep.
So what do you see next in the IoT space for this project? I'm sure that there's a bit of a roadmap that's laid out, some features that may be coming down the line.
So we have, of course, like any good company would do, we have tackled the most difficult part first, right? This OT over-the-air updates. So the next step is, the next challenges actually are, I see for our organization, are predictive analytics. And predictive analytics, in my humble opinion, is more an infrastructure challenge rather than a technical challenge. You actually have to build up the infrastructure. You have to have server systems and proper database design to get all this information. That's simply just a applying of good IT practices. The big challenge will be the integration of commercial systems such as Oracle, such as Salesforce, into the ecosystem, into the connected ecosystem. And I do believe this is going to be, that's where some feathers will be ruffled within our organization, because any organization will have certain boundaries. Okay, I own this part, you own this part. Connected infrastructure flows in between. So at the classical IT side, it's really not applicable for such an ecosystem. Neither is the engineering side, the R&D side. So it really sits between a rock and a hard place, between the business as well as on the IT side. So it sits in between those two big boulders. And this is very difficult. And somebody has to own this. This is and I do foresee this is going to be some of the larger challenges. Plus, we of course have the potential security issues, depending which data you and your customers are dealing with. SOX 2 comes to mind, high trust comes to mind. where you have to certify your infrastructure. I think that these are the real future challenges for us at FujiFilm Sonosite.
Now, earlier you mentioned that you would advise people not to build their own systems when they can commercially buy it, which of course we would wholeheartedly agree with. So that was a great piece of advice to offer to our listeners today. But is there anything else that you'd like to offer as advice to them?
Yeah, start small. Don't do what we did. Don't pick off the most complex thing right away. Yes, we were lucky. We had good partners, and we got it done. But start small. Do the low-hanging fruit. Then set reasonable expectations with your leadership team, and ensure that you have the backing to make changes in your organizational processes and structural changes to your organization. And I think the most important part is define a long-term owner for the ecosystem. That is a very, very important thing. If you don't identify a long-term owner, nobody wants to own this. It doesn't fit into R&D. IT will walk away from it. It does not. You need to have some organization owning this. Make it part of your budget. Make sure you have an annual budget for your infrastructure. And the last part is, I would say, pick a reliable partner that you can live with for all corporate eternity. It's just like marriage, right? That's what I would suggest.
One of the things I think a lot of, we kind of talked about this very quickly. You're talking about changing your company, and the point is that you're not just applying technology to the process or to the problem, but you're really fundamentally changing the way the company has to operate from a service perspective. And that requires ownership. That requires people to take that and be the passionate advocate for that change. That requires a budget and a whole host of things. So really important for people to understand that. And if you decide to choose to go with a partner and be part of that process, that's something obviously that needs to be managed into the equation. And those are really good. I've had a number of customers who talk about change and struggle with that process of change. And I think the reality is it needs to be somebody's full-time job, right? Because part-time jobs get part-time results.
Exactly.
I'd like to thank Harald Fiedler for joining us today. I'm glad that we were able to have this third discussion about security. It's great to talk about what is possible. It's really important to talk to people about what has been achieved. So thank you, Harald, for joining us and telling us how FujiFilm Sonosite has rolled out their latest IoT program. For Speaking of Service, I'm Anthony Maffa. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Service podcast, brought to you by PTC. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a rating or review. And be sure to check out other episodes to hear new perspectives on improving life for aftermarket professionals, service teams, and the customers they support. If you have a topic of interest or want to provide feedback, email us at speakingofservice@ptc.com or visit us at ptc.com/speakingofservice.